when I came here, I was sure that it was temporary. So I'm absolutely accidentally here, and it's really a miracle that I can say something in English and someone can understand me.
So it seems like you've been doing a lot of interviews with some other publications as well. I've seen your video on Newsy and AP and some other publications. So yeah, that's why I was quite convinced that your English is pretty good. And what would be the problem? And your story was like so interesting. So yeah, again, thanks for your time and doing this interview with me, and your interest in our project. So I'm really glad to have you.
For your interest in this story, because it's a really painful topic, Russian and Ukrainian war, and
yeah, especially like after the Trump administration, like things have been changing so fast, and
Trump victory, it's a real disaster for me, and sure,
yeah,
it's
been
really hard topic.
Yeah, so like I mentioned in our Facebook message, it's gonna be like around 30 minutes. I'll try my best to make this interview as short as I can. And if you have any questions about the story, I'm pretty sure the story is going to be published sometime in January or so. So you can, please feel free to ask me any questions, any follow-up. If you have any things come up, I'm always here.
Okay.
So
in January.
I'm sorry?
Right?
So, am I pronouncing your name right? Ksenia?
Ksenia, right.
And your last name? How do you pronounce your last name, please?
Kihilova.
I'm sorry?
Kihilova.
Kihilova. Oh, okay. You know what? All the Russian that I could speak is like...
Your name, right pronunciation, Choi, right?
Yeah, Jiwon Choi. Correct, perfect. I know, like spasiba or just skibridze. Like
maybe sometime you should learn Russian.
I really want to learn. Like I know that Russian has 12 different tones, so I'm just like feel a little scared of learning it.
But maybe it's bad joke, but now it's my language of current American administration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So okay, so my first question is gonna be just tell me about your journalistic background. Like, what did you do back in Russia? And I know you worked in Ukraine as well, and you're now here in the U.S. As a journalist in exile. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. Anything. So yeah, tell me about your journalist background. When did you start?
Sure. I just want to make it clear that all my problems in Russia started because of my activity here. Yes, before I came here, I worked several years several years before immigration in Russian opposition newspaper, Novaya Gazeta, new newspaper, in Urals branch. I lived in my hometown Yekaterinburg.
It was in Russia.
Yes, Novaya Gazeta, it's maybe Anna Politkovskaya's newspaper. Yes, and yes, sometimes I covered some dangerous topics. For example, I exposed corruption in local FSB. It's Russian Security Service in 2012. But nevertheless, yes, we had some problems with FSB. Of course, they didn't like this work. But honestly, when I came here, I had an opportunity to return back in Russia. But I came here accidentally. My husband, he's a citizen of Ukraine, he had temporarily worked contract in the US as many software engineers. So when I came here, I was sure that it was temporary. I had only H4 visa. He had H1B and my visa was H4, temporary visa without work permit. And at the same time, a Russian and Ukrainian war began. It was really a coincidence.
And when was that? When did you come to the US?
In the end of March of 2014.
So you didn't expect
it was just after annexion of Crimea. And a few days before the first Russian militaries, the first Russian fighters appeared on Donbass.
Mm-hmm.
It's east part of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So the war started about 3 days after I came here, the same time. And of course, it was a real shock for me because I hoped that they wouldn't dare invasion to the other part of Ukraine, except Crimea. I never approved the annexion of Crimea, but at least I had hope that they wouldn't go further. But they did. And of course, I knew situation very well because I was in Ukraine during Euromaidan. And I have many friends in Ukraine, including east part of Ukraine. My husband's parents live in Kharkov. It's a city near front line. It's also a city from the east part of Ukraine. And I know exactly that there were no reasons to begin the war except Russian invasion. Yes, many people in this part of Ukraine were really pro-Russian. They had some sympathies to Russia, but there were no genocides, no repression against Russian speakers people, so nothing what Russian propaganda tells. And all this contradiction, it was possible to solve without the war. And the only real reasons to war was Russian propaganda and Russian invasion, and Russian fighters like Strelkov, Girkin, and other people. So of course I perfectly understood that Russia is guilty of all these deaths, all these tragedies. And it was a real shock for me, and I just I consider it my duty to do something with it. So I tried to write articles on Russian media.
So you started writing articles about Russia after the Ukraine conflict?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Because you feel like it was a duty.
Anti-war, to try to explain to Russian audience that it's Russia's fault. There were no reasons for this war, but for first 4 months, maybe I realized that it was absolutely useless. And I started to write articles for Ukrainian newspapers, for Ukrainian outlets. I started from social analyst because the main question for me was to understand what happened with Russian society, how they so actively approved an aggressive war. Because before the war, Russian propaganda used defensive motivation. That we have to protect Putin's regime in order to avoid revolution, chaos, like in Libya and in other Middle East countries. So they used defensive motivation, but not aggressive. And I began to analyze Russian propaganda, the fears, phobias, the mentality, and I was surprised that this work was so necessary here in the United States, because very few people did the same at that time. And well-known American expert Paul Goebel began make reviews of these articles, not exact translation, but some English language review. It was a surprise for me. Several months I even didn't know that anyone translated my articles into Russian or into English. So, and when I noticed that my work was useful here, course, I started to do more. I really almost forgot about myself because the main sense for me was to influence on something. And thanks to Paul Global and other American experts, I discovered that I can do spread some information. I can to tell the truth to American audience and maybe to influence on something. And of course, I tried to do everything I could to stop this war. And I consider it as my duty as a Russian citizen, and I couldn't expect that I would work so effectively. Because except social analysis, I managed to create expert network on post-Soviet space in Balkan states, in several other countries, and these experts helped me to trace down Russian channels of influence in the countries. For example, one time a very good Belarusian expert provided me many interviews against construction of a Russian military base in Belarus. And it's possible that some of the arguments influenced on Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Anyway, Lukashenko refused to build this military base, and maybe this fact prevented involvement of Belarus in Russian wars. Another time I found a very interesting source from Serbia, and he provided me real evidence, video and audio evidence of connections between Russian Ministry of Defense and Russian diplomats and Serbian radicals, mostly known as Montenegrin terrorists. Maybe you heard about a coup attempt in Montenegro last fall, and when Russia tried to use Serbian radicals in coup attempt against pro-West Montenegrin government. Fortunately, this attempt was failed, but it was very important to prove these ties, these connections. For example, one of people who officially accused in preparing this coup, accused by Montenegrin prosecutors, I have video when he admitted that he have done some assignment from Russian Ministry of Defense in occupied Crimea, in Serbia, and other countries. And it's I think it's important information. One time we find evidence that Russia spread a fake story about Crimea sabotage. Ukrainian sabotage in occupied Crimea. So yes, sometimes it was very valuable information, and I would be glad if this information could help someone to better understand the situation with the Russian threat now. And the main important thing for me, if this information could prevent new Russian provocations around the world, because you already know how many victims could be after this provocation.
So I'm really touched by your saying, like, you felt this duty as a journalist, as a social analysis, to dig in this issue and let people know about this. Like, it's awesome. Like, I'm really thankful for your work and stuff. So let me just make it a little clear about like what you just told about. So you were a journalist back in Russia or not?
Yes, I was.
So you were a journalist back in Russia as well?
As I already said, I worked in opposition newspaper before migration. Novaya Gazeta as journalist, sure. I spent about 10 years in journalism, maybe more.
Wow. Like you spent 10 years in Russia as a journalist?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thanks for making it all clear. And what kind of reporting did you do in Russia? And I know what you have been doing in the U.S. recently. But
in Russia, honestly, I wasn't involved in international issues. The main sphere of my activity was local problems in Urals and my hometowns. I tried to cover some social problems. In the beginning, I worked in a large local media holding. Уральский рабочий. It's Soviet title. They didn't change it, but it was a modern and very good newspaper. It was like a school of classic journalism, and they raised many real problems. But on 2010. Structure of government changed in my region. Before this time, local government, local authorities were absolutely independent from federal authorities. We elected the head of our town mayor, and we solved our local problems ourselves. But after 2010, they created a united power system, a system of government, and they added a new position like city manager, something like that, who was appointed by a region government. But region level, yes, region level was appointed by federal level. So actually, it's turned out that we have a one system from Moscow to the local level. And we cannot influence it, and it became impossible to cover any social problems, because any problems has some government official who is responsible for these problems, and it became impossible to publish any critical articles about any person on local level, on regional level, federal level, and it became very difficult to write truth.
So it became like almost impossible to do those things.
Yes. Before this change, I worked in local media, sometimes in adequate religion media, because I also helped in some social programs in Orthodox Church, and I held myself conversation with drug addicts in a rehabilitation center. So yes, I wasn't involved in politics from the beginning. I started from some social work, social issues, but Russia changed beyond recognizing in front of my eyes, and every year it's became harder and harder to write the truth about all these problems. So I started to work in opposition media. Just to help people who faced with corruption system, with something intranslatable word Russian, беспредел.
So the hardship actually led you to be a political reporter, because you wanted to dig into the corruptions and stuff there.
Yes, maybe not. I didn't consider it as political. I consider it more as human rights defending activity.
Or investigative reporter.
Because in the last years before immigration was Putin's third term, we faced with some kind of repression, not so harsh as now. Before Russian and Ukrainian war, they almost didn't organize criminal cases against ordinary people. But now they accused people in state prison only for support of Ukraine and any communication with foreigners, and they arrange criminal cases for hate speech, for example, for extremism, against cell women or home wives, only for repost on social networks against the war. And I know personally several people who were accused, who were charged in extremism only for the peaceful position against Russian and Ukrainian war. It's real facts. So before the war, it wasn't so hard talk in Russia, but we also got corruption, any oppositional events. Yes, we wrote about this because no other media wrote about these events. We should to reflect some events, some situations, some problems in Russian prisons, in political sphere, in social sphere, in corruption, and human rights, and other. Of course, because we just wanted people to know about this part of social life. So, because other media, in best case, they just kept silent about that.
So you just told that your local government change assigned by the federal government had made the situation regarding journalists there like a little different, and
yes.
So did it coincide with the war situation there? Like how would you say, are they related each other? Like
unfortunately, before the war, I wasn't engaged in international affairs, so I have to admit I didn't predict this war because I wasn't international journalist before. But what I exactly observed, what I saw, it was the extraordinary level of hatred inside Russian society. And of course, it has some connection with the war because Russian population was already ready to the war, and the level of aggression increased every year, every month. Pro-Soviet, pro-Stalin moods and Russian propaganda became more and more aggressive. So it was obvious that this situation should lead to war, repression, something like that. And on international level now, I speak with many experts from post-Soviet states and North Caucasus and Belarus, Baltic states, and some countries in East Europe, Poland, and other countries, and all of them tell me the same thing, that all Russian policy inside the countries was represented by blackmail, some had influence, corruption, increasing of military presence, propaganda, lie, fears, spreading of anti-West moods, and so on. So yes, it was. I guess it was unavoidable consequences of all Russian policy.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it was natural, unfortunately. Now, when I see all the picture of Russian policy, both domestic and foreign, I see that it was almost unavoidable. Just it's a continuation of Russian policy. Russian foreign policy is just a continuation of Russian domestic policy. And maybe it's important to know for American audience, because in Russian foreign propaganda, They try to convince Americans that they consider United States as their friend, and that it's United States government's fault, the bad relationships. That they pretend that Russia never wanted to have bad relationships with the United States, and they're friends with American population, but unfortunately, Americans just don't know Russian language. But if you watch a Russian media on Russian language, Russian domestic media, even before the war and before Ukrainian events, they consider the United States as the main enemy. And they on the talk show, the politics declared that they are ready to destroy the United States at all. And all Russian propaganda inside the country was absolutely anti-American. And there are no fascism or genocide in Ukraine. The real, in Russian opinion, the real fault of Ukrainian people was their pro-Western choice, because they consider it like treason. Just because they consider the United States as their enemy, and the desire of any people to follow the United States example, to be closer with the West, they consider as treason. So they just try to punish Ukraine for the choice.
So I'm just wondering, like, you worked in Ukraine with Alexander.
I live in the United States. I just write for Ukrainian media from here.
Oh, okay. Now I get it. Okay, thanks for making it clear. Okay, my bad. I'm so sorry.
To write articles in it.
Yeah. So I got a little confused. So you worked for the headquarters was in Ukraine, and you worked in the U.S. for that office.
Work in the U.S.
Okay, very clear.
I came here and I live here for 3.5 years. So I didn't return in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, because I was just wondering, like, how many Russian journalists like are there in Ukraine, and what are the situations like regarding them. But yeah, I'll do more research on that for sure.
My friends, yes, also Russian journalists and another Russian refugees, they live in Ukraine, and you already know that my close friend Alexander, in Russian diminutive version Sasha, Sasha Shitinin, was found dead last August with a shotgun wound in his head, and it's very strange death, because the Ukrainian police now considers two options, suicide and murder, and they officially said that they would investigate this case as a murder, and now we don't have any results on this case.
So I saw this, and I'm so sorry for your friends, like, misfortune. Like, I was really, like, so sad reading your memoir about him.
Yes, he was really my good friend, because he made the same choice as me. He also was a Russian journalist who supported Ukraine, but of course we had some different biographies. For example, I worked before immigration in Russian opposition newspaper. Sasha was a head of a large Russian, it was Russian, not Ukrainian, news agency, New Region, Novy Region. And it was really one of the oldest and largest Russian news agencies. It had branches in every Russian regions and abroad, in Kiev and in Vilnius, it's Lithuania, Baltic states. And Sasha supported Maidan, and after the beginning of the war, he knew situation in Ukraine perfectly, because last 10 years of his life he lived for two countries, Russia and Ukraine, and he couldn't participate in war crimes, even on propaganda level. And he spotted Ukraine. He had to break up all his connections with Russian editorials because all of them were under FSB control. So he lost the most part of his business. He lost the opportunity to return in Russia, to see his family. He had adult children from his previous marriage, and he couldn't visit them. And of course, it was one of his main concern.
Must be really hard.